The term pigeonhole describes an entry by which pigeons access the comfort and the security of the coop. Here's the problem. Not all pigeons live in a coop. Some prefer the park. And the term pigeonhole has evolved to describe a list of characteristics that we impose on others, expectations that we hope they live up to. And I've experienced this as a Christian pastor and a professor. And so I'm always dealing with the expectations that others have of me. And perhaps you experience that as well. But here's the problem. Not all pigeons live in a coop. Some prefer the park. Cultural anthropologist Paul Hyward has written about how we understand how societies form, and he uses the terms bounded and centered to describe these cultural models. A bounded set is hard and fast boundaries that are erected to keep certain things out and certain things in. Whereas a centered set is without boundaries and it's all about what emanates from that particular center. Now, as a Christian pastor and a liberal arts professor, I often have other people that attempt to define what I think, what I say, and how I live my life. And often it comes in the form of these. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but with bounded sets, typically people look at me as a Christian pastor and they think that I'm going to have certain perspectives about God, family, sexuality, and most recently and most loudly, obviously, in the culture in which we live, politics. But understand that this works in a centered set as well. In a centered set, my thoughts about family and God and sexuality and politics emanates from this particular center. So how do we understand this? What's a good analogy? Well, in the book, The Shape of Things to Come, Hirsch and Frost give a wonderful analogy. When the American West was being settled, cattle ranchers would erect fences like this, a barbed wire fence, an artificial wall, if you will, to keep cattle corralled. But in other places across the world, this was cost prohibitive and it wasn't practical. For example, in places like Australia where you had the vast country, it was very difficult to erect walls and to put up fences. So what cattle ranchers did in Australia is they dug a well. And the concept is this. The cattle may wander, but they will not go very far from the life-giving source of the water, the well. This illustrates the difference between a bounded set and a centered set. So the challenge for us today, ladies and gentlemen, is how do we choose to live our lives? Do we live our lives by the boundaries that others put around us? Or do we choose to live from a centered understanding of who we are and what we are about? One of my personal heroes is this man, William Jade Seymour. He was the son of African slaves from Louisiana. He was a spiritual seeker and a gospel preacher. And in 1906, he was in Los Angeles, California, and he opened up a mission at 312 Azusa Street. And for the next 3 years, he had a service there 3 times a day, 7 days a week, morning, noon, and night. People from all over the world would come to experience what he was preaching. He is the father of global Pentecostalism. But now what makes Seymour unique is that during this revival, at the height of Jim Crow in America, he led an integrated service. Black and white, rich and poor, male and female would worship together. And it was because Seymour was unique. He did not subscribe to the boundaries that were imposed upon him by Jim Crow America, but rather he led from the center of who he was and the conviction that he had. And by doing so, he attracted audiences from around the world, and the Pentecostal movement continues to influence the world today. Now, if you want to know how this understanding impacts my life, you need look no further than my personal social media page. Right there, it says Scot Loyd, gospel preacher and professor. And by identifying myself as a gospel preacher and a professor, my friends and my family have certain expectations that they want me to conform to. They want me to live up to a particular understanding of what they think it means to be a gospel preacher and a liberal arts professor. Now, sometimes this gets me in trouble, and admittedly, sometimes I do enjoy stirring the pot, but I really do have an agenda. I want people to think, and I want them to think clearly about what they believe. For example, at the height of the Me Too movement in November of 2017, I posted this: "Don't condemn women for lack of modesty. Condemn men for mistreating women as objects of consumption." As you might expect, there was a lot of dissonance, there was a lot of pushback as people started to think critically about what was happening in our country and around the world. And some 700 comments later, the conversation continues. But that was nothing compared to a conversation that I had with my friend Allie Henning last summer, where I wanted to listen and learn about systemic racism in our country. I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to understand what was happening with race relations within the United States of America. And because of her work in this area, and because she is a vocal and outspoken person that is leading the way to help people understand these issues, I reached out to my friend and I simply asked her questions. You would be amazed at the vitriol that was directed towards me and towards Allie, so much so that I had someone on my friend list challenge me to a public debate on whether or not institutionalized racism was a thing. Did it even exist? And it was amazing, all of the comments that were directed at me simply because people had a certain expectation of what I should be doing and what I should be believing when it comes to these particular issues. So I want to challenge you today, ladies and gentlemen, to not conform necessarily to the expectations that others place upon you. Refuse to live by artificial boundaries. Don't build those walls, but rather dig a well. Find that center within you and live your life from that particular center. How do we do this? How do we stay centered in a bounded world? I believe there's three powerful ways that we can do this. First of all, we need to practice hospitality. Practice hospitality. Don't assume that others are hostile just because they are different from you. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean inviting them in your house, although it can mean that, and we should do that, but rather we should invite people into our lives and have that reciprocated. Get to know others, especially those that are different from yourself. Next, we should cultivate community instead of mere affinity. You see, affinity reduces everyone to just an audience. It reduces everyone to an echo chamber. Affinity means only hanging out with those that are like you, that think like you, that look like you, that act like you. As a Christian, this is antithetical to what I've been called to do. I need to engage with those that are different than me, and most importantly, I need to listen to what they have to say. And community is far different than just mere affinity, because community is marked by real diversity. And diversity means listening to others that are different than you are. And the third one we can practice right here, right now. Why don't you turn to someone near you and tell them, "Hi, my name is," and then you fill in the blank. Come on, this is audience participation. Do this right now. Introduce yourself to the person sitting next to you, behind you. There you go. Doesn't that feel good? All right, you're like the audiences at church now. You get too carried away with this, right? Isn't that amazing when we say, "Hi, my name is Scot Loyd"? When you introduce yourself to someone, especially someone that's different, and you say, "Hey, tell me about your dreams, and tell me about how I can help you achieve those dreams." That will help you live a life that isn't defined by boundaries, that isn't defined by artificial walls or fences, but rather is defined from a deep, life-giving well that is springing up within you. You see, ladies and gentlemen, in the final analysis, I'm convinced that the people who will serve as the greatest influence on our future are not those who erect fences, not those that build walls, not those that allow themselves to be pigeonholed by society, but rather those that will have the greatest influence on our future are the well diggers. Dig a well. Stay centered, my friends. Thank you.